So this video isn't gonna be a happy one because something really sad happened today at Spa-Francorchamps. So for the second time in about 4 years, there has been a fatality in the junior racing series. Um, Unlike 4 years ago, it wasn't Formula 2, and the driver wasn't in his early 20s. This time it was in Formula Regional, which is sort of a Formula 3.5 kind of series, and the driver was only 18. Now, this driver's name was, and I'm sorry if I pronounce this wrong, Dilano van Hoff. He had won the 2021 Spanish F4 Championship and had his whole career ahead of him. Now, he was only 18 years old, and I don't think there's been a motorsport fatality that young since, in terms of in terms of single seaters, since I think Henry Surtees in 2009, because Antoine Hubert, who was the last fatality in open wheel cars, in 2019, he passed away at the age of 22. This crash was completely preventable if they hadn't held the race, because a regular race of Spa-Francorchamps, I mean, of course, all motor racing is dangerous, but if it was a dry race, then the likely thing is I wouldn't be making this video right now. There was torrential rain. It looked far too wet to race on, and because of that, the accident happened. If the race was dry, then the accident would not have happened because of the circumstances of the crash, which I won't go into detail about because that's not really respecting the privacy of the family. And it's really sad because this man, he had his whole life ahead of him. This young man, he's only 3 years older than I am now, which really scares me because, when Hubert passed away, he was a decade older than me. This boy was only 3 years older than me. He had his whole life ahead of him, he could have had children, he could have raised a family, he could have, done decent for himself in racing cars, whether that be in single seaters or in GT racing or in endurance racing. And condolences go out to not only his family, who need as much privacy as possible at this time, so please do not share any videos of the accident, because people, first of all, most people don't want to see that sort of thing appearing on their Twitter or their Instagram feed, but also because it's really disrespectful of the family, and we need to give them time to try and deal with this. He never had the chance to have a family. He never had the chance to properly grow up, to become independent, to own his own house, to have his own family, to have success in racing. He never had the chance to experience things in life that many people do. Someone who's only 18 never really get to experience the same things as someone who's 40 or 50. He did something that many of us hadn't done, which was, be very good at racing cars, but he didn't get to experience what others did, adults, I mean, and that just makes it really sad. The whole motorsport world is now mourning the loss of a really talented young driver, and yet the accident was so preventable. If they had just not held that race, then he would have been fine. And it wasn't safe enough to race. You could tell based on the weather and based on the spray that was being formed from the track that it wasn't safe. And yet they raced on it anyway. And that's my problem with racing, is that even when it's too dangerous, the FIA or whoever the governing body is almost always chooses to race anyway, which is absolutely absurd. They should not have allowed this race to take place because it was far too dangerous. And yet, they did. It's like they never learn, you know? Because in the 60s and 70s, one accident would happen and they would just brush over it. And that started to change with Sid Watkins and Jackie Stewart making a massive push for driver safety. And it did change. But they're still doing this, where they're holding races that are far too dangerous. The FIA are still making far too many mistakes, which you think they would have learned from. A prime example of that is the Japanese Grand Prix last year, or the Turkish Grand Prix in, I think it was 2021. So in 2014, Joe Bianchi suffered a fatal accident at the Japanese Grand Prix Suzuka when his car hit a crane. And you'd think they would never deploy a crane again when there was a car on track. When there were cars on track. You would think wrong. Pierre Gasly was meters away from suffering the same fate as Joe Bianchi. That just shows how dangerous the FIA are sometimes. And again, they started one of the qualifying sessions a couple years ago in Turkey when there was still a crane out on track retrieving an abandoned car. They should never be able to do this. This should be made illegal under the FIA guidelines. And it should be the same thing for wet races. They should never hold a race if it is too wet for them to race in. Another example is Spa last year, where Lando Norris literally suffered a high-speed accident and had a massive aquaplane up Eau Rouge. And you could tell it was too dangerous to drive because everyone was struggling in the conditions. And you'd think, based on last year at Spa, that the FIA would learn, but they haven't. And that is exactly why the entirety of the motorsport community is in shock now. Condolences go to his family, to MP Motorsport, and to pretty much everyone in racing, because we've lost a genuinely talented young driver today. And you know, whenever a racing driver dies, everyone's in mourning because a very talented individual is lost. Because not everyone is born with the ability to race cars like Dilano was. But yeah, I just wanted to make this video because it's really sad, and I think that the more people need to know about it. So, final word, like I said earlier, do not share any photos or any videos of the accident online, because that is evading the Van Toff's family's privacy. I hope you pay your respects to Dilano and his family, and be respectful to them in this difficult time, because as someone who's lost a relative when they were quite young, it's horrible if you abuse that respect. Let them mourn, because if we're feeling like this right now, imagine how his family are feeling. They've grown up with him for 18 years. You know, they've watched him go through school. They've watched him go through karting, go through Formula 4. They've watched him improve and improve in racing and get better and better as a driver and get better and better as a personality. They've grown up with him. I don't know if he has siblings or not, or if he has cousins, but they've grown up with him. You know, his friends are going to be mourning his loss. You know, there are going to be so many people who are mourning right now, and we need to give them the privacy and respect that they deserve. But yeah, thank you for watching.